All right, so with all my years in software development, I can tell you one thing. Agile is not just another buzzword. It's a fundamental mind shift that separates the successful teams from the death marches. So the problem is most teams think that doing Agile means Scrum, and they're actually trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare that I call the Scrum Theater, where you have all the ceremonies but none of the benefits. So I've rescued dozens of teams who were drowning in sprint planning meetings and yet couldn't deliver working software to save their lives. They were doing Scrum, but they weren't being Agile. Today I'm going to share the real principles about what makes your team truly Agile, not just the checkbox exercises that most consultants sell you, but the practical battle-tested approaches that actually deliver value. So let's dive into some of my experience here and talk about these today. Welcome to Startup Hack. I'm Spencer Thompson. Here at Startup Hack, we train software developers in our licensed coding boot camps and build custom software solutions for companies. With a decade of executive leadership as a fractional CTO and 25 years in software development, I've mastered transforming tech teams and products. All right, so let's get right to the heart of this. Agile is good. Scrum, I'm not a fan of. So I've just got some thoughts about Scrum that will definitely ruffle some feathers here. After watching countless teams get bogged down in Scrum rituals while missing the entire point of being Agile, I've developed a pretty strong opinion. I like Kanban, and it gives you the most of the benefits without the unnecessary overhead. The Agile Manifesto never mentioned 2-week sprints, poker planning, or burn down charts. It talks about individuals, working software, and responding to change. So let's cut through some of the consultant speak and get to the principles that actually matter for building great software in the real world. So if your team spend more time in Scrum meetings than actually coding, you've completely missed the point of being Agile. Working software in the hands of users is the only meaningful measure of progress, not story points, not velocity charts, not how many tickets you've closed in Jira. I once consulted for a team that had a perfect sprint ceremonies, but hadn't released anything to users in 6 months. They were 100% Scrum compliant and 0% Agile. So the most valuable Agile principles is working software is the primary measure of progress, not how well you fill out your Jira ticket or how precise your sprint planning is. So when teams obsess over Scrum ceremonies rather than delivering value, they're like a chef who spends all day organizing their spice rack while the restaurant customers starve. So after my 25 years in software development, my simple test for Agile isn't do you do stand-ups, but how quickly can you get a small change into production and in front of real users. So you really got to be able to embrace change. You don't want to fight it. Traditional Scrum actually fights against change by locking down sprint backlogs. Sorry, that critical bug fix will have to wait for the next sprint planning, as opposed to is definitely the opposite of it, Agile. The reason I prefer Kanban is that it allows you to adapt your priorities continuously rather than pretending the world stops changing for 2-week intervals. So after 2.5 decades of building software, I've never once seen a project where requirements didn't evolve significantly from start to finish. Being truly Agile means accepting your understanding of the problem will change as you build the solution. It's not a failure of planning, it's the nature of complex work. It's the nature of innovation. The best teams don't prevent change or treat it as an exception. They build their entire process around the assumption that change is normal and expected. When a team complains about scope creep, it often means they failed to embrace one of Agile's core principles. This principle is welcome change requirements even late in development. So one of the most powerful Agile principles that Scrum often misses is limiting work in progress. A team juggling 10 half-dozen done stories will deliver value slower than a team focused on finishing a few things completely. This is where Kanban shines. By explicitly limiting work in progress, you force the hard conversation about priorities up front rather than pretending everything can be done at once. That's what sprint planning does. It says, hey, all this chunk of stuff is going to get delivered at one time. So I've seen productivity double simply by imposing a strict work in progress limit that force a team to finish tasks before starting new ones. No new process, framework, or certification required. So the psychological benefits is enormous. Developers get satisfaction of completing work rather than constant frustration of context switching between many unfinished tasks. So after 25 years, I've learned that most productive teams aren't the ones working on the most things simultaneously. They're ones finishing important things completely. So think of development like bowling. You don't get points for knocking down half the pins or 10 different lanes. You score by knocking down all the pins on one lane before you move to the next one. So the fourth Agile principle most teams miss is building quality into the process rather than trying to test it it in afterwards. No amount of QA can save you from sloppy development practices. Scrum often treats testing as something that happens at the end of the sprint, while truly agile teams integrate testing continuously into their development workflow. After seeing hundreds of teams, developers struggle with technical debt, I'm convinced that automating testing isn't optional for agile. You really need to work on trying to get automated testing in. So the best teams I've worked with don't separate testing phases. They consider a feature incomplete until it's tested, documented, and ready for real users. So if your definition of done doesn't include proper testing, you're just accumulating debt that will slow you down and eventually bring development to a crawl. Now, if your company is struggling with finding balance between quality and speed, let us help you out. Here at Startup Hack, our specialty is connecting systems to help your company work like a well-oiled machine. So check out startuphack.com/Spencer because we can help you out. Now, the Agile Manifesto starts with, quote, individuals and interactions over process and tools, end quote. Yet I watch companies spend millions of dollars on Jira configurations while treating developers as interchangeable resources. Scrum can actually dehumanize development by reducing people to story point velocity and treating every developer as if they had the exact same skill, interests, and capabilities. So I've managed developers for a long time, and I know that understanding each person's unique strengths and motivations will do more for productivity than any process improvement could ever achieve. True agility comes from empowering teams who feel ownership over both the problem and the solution, not from teams that are just following orders or filling in tickets to hit velocity points. The best technical solutions emerge when you trust developers solve problems rather than prescribing exactly how they should do their work. So if your agile transformation involves adding more process and tools without fundamentally changing how people interact and make decisions, you've totally missed the point. So one agile principle that Scrum gets right is the focus on frequent delivery, but where it goes wrong is by forcing artificial time boxes that often don't match natural cycles of work. A 2-week sprint makes no sense if your feature takes 3 days or 3 months to deliver valuable functionality. Kanban allows the work to determine the timing, not the calendar. So after watching teams pad estimates to fill sprint boundaries or arbitrarily slice work into 2-week chunks, I'm convinced that calendar-based delivery cycles often create more waste than value. The goal isn't to release every 2 weeks. The goal is to release valuable improvements as soon as they're ready, which might be every day, every week, or every month, depending on the work. Continuous delivery pipelines have made it possible to release safely when you want, removing technical justifications for artificial sprints. So if your team is regularly carrying work from sprint to sprint, that's a clear sign that your artificial time boxes aren't aligned with the natural rhythm of your work. Now, simplicity is essential, right? Simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential, and it's one of my favorite agile principles, but one of the most violated by heavyweight Scrum implementations. The irony of many Scrum implementations is that they create massive amounts of overhead, planning poker, estimation meetings, velocity calculations, burn down charts, all of which constitute work that isn't directly delivering value. So I'm convinced that the best process is the minimum process required to deliver quality software reliably, and everything beyond that is waste. Kanban embraces simplicity by focusing on visualizing work, limiting work in progress, and measuring flow, the minimum structure needed to improve without imposing artificial constraints. So the most productive teams I've worked with have had simple processes that everyone understands. So if your team needs certified experts, you can dive in, but I really finding a process that works well for your team. All right. Next, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility, end quote. And it's perhaps one of the most neglected principles in teams that focus too much on process side of Agile. Too many Scrum teams optimize for short-term velocity at the expense of code quality, architecture, and technical debt. They worry about fitting something into a 2-week sprint instead of making a quality architectural decision. Truly agile teams invest in refactoring, automating testing, and continuous integration and clean code, not as a separate task, but as an integral part of delivering any feature. I've seen teams double their productivity by not by changing their process, but by dedicating time to improving their code base and their test coverage and deployment pipelines. The teams that move fastest in the long run aren't the ones who cut corners to hit sprint goals. They're ones who maintain high standards for code quality regardless of deadline pressures. So I like this next one, right? Quote, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly as an agile principle that's paid lip service in sprint retrospectives, but rarely results in meaningful change. Now, I've sat through too many sprint retrospectives that just get on to repeat. It seems like Groundhog Day where we discuss the same thing. I've often listed sprint retrospectives as the same thing as a sixth grade elementary school election. In a sixth grade elementary school election, the president of the elementary school always promises that they're going to have unlimited recess and all the unlimited ice cream at lunch. But the thing is that you can never really deliver this. So we get into our sprint retrospective and we say, oh man, it'd be really great if we didn't have stories stack up at the end of the sprint so that test wasn't overloaded so that we didn't delay the release, right? And this is an example. And yet we're not going to fix that in one sprint. So then the next sprint, we're still complaining about the same problem. And then the next sprint and the next sprint and the next sprint, because this is an inherent problem of Scrum, not necessarily something that you can fix in one retrospective. So I really like to actually plan these around releases or even every other release to do some introspectives to ask the team what things we think we could do better. So after facilitating hundreds of retrospectives over 25 years, I've learned that they're only valuable if they lead to concrete changes of how the team works. Otherwise, it's just a therapy session, and the ones who complain the most are the ones who always get the mic. So true agility means your process itself is continuously evolving based on what you learn, not rigidly following a methodology regardless of its results. Now, what are your thoughts? Do you think I'm wrong? I know every Scrum coach out there is going to come at me and tell me, well, if Scrum isn't working, it's because you're not doing Scrum right. And that's one of my favorite cop-outs to that too. And I can't say enough that you have obviously haven't listened to the things that I'm saying here. If your team spends more time updating tickets and documentation than actually than talking to each other to end users about what you're building, you've strayed far from Agile principles, regardless of what methodology you claim to be following. So what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Love to have a great discussion. So make sure you leave a comment down below. Make sure you like and subscribe. Here at Starter Pack, we love to train software developers in our licensed coding boot camps, as well as build custom software solutions for companies. So reach out because we'd love to help. Check out starterpack.com/Spencer. And here's some great information if you're looking to dive in and get better at your software development.
Want to become a software developer but don't want to spend 4 years in college and rack up massive student loan debts? Think you need technical expertise to get started? Welcome to Startup Hack, a better way to start your software career without student loans and years without income. One-on-one tutoring is included so you never get stuck and have guidance through the whole process. No technical experience is necessary. Learn at your own pace and in your own space. Startup Hack has worked with local state agencies in your area to make it so that qualifying students can get the program costs covered entirely and students can start earning while they learn.
Startup Hack's .NET Coding Bootcamp was a game changer for my career. As someone with no prior programming experience, I was initially intimidated by the idea of learning to code, but the instructors at Startup Hack broke down complex concepts into easy to understand lessons and provided hands-on projects that really cemented my understanding. The curriculum was comprehensive and up to date and got me ready for my first job. What really set Startup Hack apart was the focus on practical, real-world skills. Thanks to Startup Hack, I landed my dream job as a .NET developer within weeks of graduating. I went from knowing nothing about code to building professional-grade web applications in just a few intense months. If you're looking to break into .NET development or level up your coding skills, I cannot recommend Startup Hack enough.
Complete our 3-month coding bootcamp, gain hands-on experience, and land a paid internship. With 2 years of experience on average, our graduates are making over $80,000 per year. The 3-month program includes technologies from Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. No debt, just a quick path to earning. Check out startuphack.com to code your future and start today.